This year will mark 24 years that April Wilkens has been in prison. Wilkens met Terry Carlton, son of Tulsa millionaire Don Carlton, in 1995. Their 3-year relationship was a whirlwind of spending, vacations, drugs, and abuse. Less than a year after their final breakup, Wilkens was arrested for his murder. But it wasn't murder to Wilkens. She had been suffering from battered woman syndrome.
Let me be very clear. Battered women syndrome is not a self-defense type of defense.
Susan Sharp tells us it's closer to an insanity plea. Sharp is a David Ross Boyd professor of sociology at the University of Oklahoma.
Oklahoma is extremely punitive towards women. Our women are not more criminal than women in any other state, yet we lock up more of them than any state but Idaho per capita. Particularly if they're not wealthy, they're not well educated, they're not living up to the standards of ideal womanhood.
During a recent phone call with Wilkens from Mabel Bassett, she tells us she was not an ideal woman.
I wonder, are there any ideal, perfect people? Very hard for me when I look back, and I know that a lot of the things that I succumbed to or fell into following the abuse were then later turned around and used by the prosecutors to blame me for the abuse.
So why didn't she stay away? She did. Wilkens filed multiple protective orders against Carlton, but he was the one who refused to stay away, and the police did not bother to enforce the orders. Wilkens says for months, Carlton broke into her home, cutting her phone lines, destroying her locks, trashing her house, and stealing her weapons to defend herself. Carlton was even arrested outside of her house with a loaded gun. An emergency protective order was granted to Wilkens that night, but she says she dropped it after Carlton threatened her life. Wilkens tells us he called her from jail and showed up at her house as soon as he bailed himself out. A warrant was issued for Carlton's arrest in March of 1998 after he failed to appear in court for the gun charge. For the next month, he continued to terrorize her.
The victim leaving gets them out of the sphere of control of the batterer. So when that happens, then the batterer is going to try to reestablish control, even if that means killing the person.
Wilkens says she called the police on Carlton, but instead of arresting him for his active warrant, the officer took Wilkens to Parkside, a local mental hospital, where she was forced to take drugs and undergo treatment for delusions.
I know for a fact that someone is trying to harm me and has threatened me and my child, and my life is in danger and my child's life is in danger. And he told me that he had the police take me to a mental institution so that it would teach me that he was the only person that cared about me.
She escaped and went home, said she was kidnapped by Carlton soon after, then held hostage for days until she could escape from him. The cops came and took both of them to Parkside. Only Wilkens was forced to remain there. Carlton again was allowed to walk free. Wilkens was then transferred to Eastern State Hospital, now defunct. A nurse and 3 employees witnessed Carlton show up and lose his temper on Wilkens, threatening her and making a scene. She was released the next day and returned home to find it had been ransacked yet again. Wilkens says she spent the next day and a half trying to find protection, but Carlton told her he'd bribed the police and her own friends not to help her.
Abuse is about control of the victim. So they very methodically cut them off from friends and family, slowly until there's no support left.
Seeing no other choice, Wilkens went to his house to plead for a truce. But there would be no truce. Instead, Wilkens was beaten and raped, all documented by a sane nurse the next day. And it wasn't the first time this had happened, nor the first time it had been documented. After enduring the cycle of abuse for more than 2 years, it finally ended on April 28, 1998. Wilkens says she found Carlton's gun and killed him with it when he tried to sodomize her. She was arrested for murder and sentenced to life in prison, where she remains to this day.